Jake Morrison stared at his third cup of synthetic coffee and wondered, not for the first time, how his life had become a series of increasingly poor decisions. The liquid in his mug looked like motor oil and tasted worse, but it was the only thing keeping him conscious during what had to be the most mind-numbing assignment in human diplomatic history. "Monitor trade disputes on Nexus 7, they said. "It'll be peaceful," they said. "Just file reports and try not to start any wars." Right. Because apparently the Galactic Council thought humans were about as threatening as a particularly aggressive houseplant. Which, to be fair, wasn't entirely wrong. Humanity had been part of the galactic community for exactly 47 years, and our biggest contribution so far had been introducing the concept of customer service complaints to species that had never imagined such a thing existed. The view from his cramped observation deck showed the sprawling ceremonial grounds of the Helix Empire, where apparently every single alien in the sector had gathered for some kind of royal wedding. Jake had received exactly 0 invitations, which suited him fine. Diplomatic immunity was great and all, but it didn't make small talk with 8-foot-tall lizard people any less awkward. That's when he saw her. Princess Zara of the Helix Empire stood in the center of the ceremonial circle, and even from this distance, Jake could see she looked about as thrilled as someone getting a root canal. She was tall, elegant, with silver skin that seemed to shimmer in the alien sunlight and eyes that, even from here, looked like they were calculating the exact trajectory needed to murder everyone in attendance. The crowd was chanting something that sounded like a garbage disposal having an existential crisis, while Princess Zara stood perfectly still, every inch the picture of royal dignity, except for her hands, which were clenched into fists at her sides. "Oh, come on," Jake muttered, recognizing the look of someone who'd rather be literally anywhere else. Even alien princesses have to deal with arranged marriages. What is this, the medieval period? As if summoned by his complaint, a figure emerged from the crowd that made Jake's coffee mug slip from his suddenly nerveless fingers. Warlord Krex the Bone Crusher was exactly what you'd expect from someone with that name, 9 feet of pure muscle, covered in ceremonial armor that looked like it had been forged from the nightmares of small children. His face resembled what would happen if someone tried to sculpt a gargoyle while having a seizure. The princess's shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly as Krex approached, and Jake felt something twist in his stomach that had nothing to do with the synthetic coffee. This wasn't just a wedding ceremony. This was a business transaction, and Princess Zara was the merchandise. "Okay, Morrison," he said to himself, "you're here to observe and report. Not to get involved in alien politics. Not to play hero. Just observe." But as Warlord Krex reached for Princess Zara's hand with all the tenderness of a garbage compactor, Jake found himself already moving toward the door of his observation deck. Because apparently 47 years of galactic diplomacy hadn't managed to stamp out humanity's most persistent character flaw, the overwhelming compulsion to stick their noses where they absolutely didn't belong. Jake had exactly 30 seconds to reconsider his life choices as he made his way toward the ceremonial grounds. 30 seconds to remember that he was a mid-level diplomat whose biggest accomplishment to date was successfully filing a noise complaint against a vegan mining operation. 30 seconds to turn around and go back to his nice, safe observation deck where the worst thing that could happen was running out of terrible coffee. Instead, he used those 30 seconds to practice what he was going to say when he inevitably got arrested for disturbing a royal wedding. The ceremonial grounds were even more intimidating up close. Thousands of aliens from a dozen different species formed concentric circles around the central platform, all of them radiating the kind of reverent attention usually reserved for solar eclipses or public executions. Jake tried to blend in, which was about as effective as a neon sign in a blackout, considering he was the only human present and roughly half the size of everyone else. Warlord Krex was in the middle of what appeared to be a very long, very boring speech about conquest and dominion, and something called the eternal binding of star systems through matrimonial alliance. Princess Zara stood beside him, her expression so perfectly neutral it could have been carved from stone. But Jake was close enough now to see the white-knuckled grip she had on her ceremonial scepter, and the way her jaw was set like she was biting back words that would probably start a war. The crowd began another round of that garbage disposal chanting, and Jake realized he was rapidly running out of time to what exactly? To interrupt a wedding? Cause a diplomatic incident? Get himself vaporized by alien security forces? That's when he noticed the ceremonial crystals. They were arranged in a perfect circle around the platform, each one about the size of a basketball and glowing with soft, ominous light. They looked important. They looked ancient. They looked exactly like the kind of thing you weren't supposed to touch under any circumstances. Jake, being human, immediately tripped over one. The crystal let out a sound like a dying whale, and suddenly every single alien in the vicinity was staring at him with expressions ranging from confusion to homicidal rage. The chanting stopped abruptly, leaving Jake standing in a silence so complete he could hear his own heartbeat echoing off the ceremonial walls. He said, which was not exactly the diplomatic opener he'd been hoping for. Sorry. Don't mind me. Just passing through. Warlord Krex's eyes, which were apparently capable of glowing red when he was angry, fixed on Jake with the intensity of laser targeting systems. What, he bellowed in a voice that could shatter glass, is the meaning of this interruption? Jake opened his mouth to explain, stumbled backward over another crystal, and in a desperate attempt to avoid falling flat on his face, reached out and grabbed the nearest stable object he could find, which happened to be Princess Zora's hand. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Every crystal in the circle began glowing like a small sun, the air filled with what sounded like 1,000 wind chimes having a nervous breakdown. And Princess Zora's eyes went wide with something that might have been shock or might have been the beginning of a smile. "Oh," she said, very quietly. "Oh, this is interesting." Warlord Krex, meanwhile, looked like someone had just told him his favorite weapon had been recalled for safety violations. "Impossible," he roared. "The ancient binding cannot be invoked by a primitive species." "Primitive?" Jake said, his diplomatic training finally kicking in. "Hey now, that's uncalled for. I'll have you know that humanity has successfully not blown up our own planet for almost 50 years running." "You realize," Princess Zara said, her voice carrying a note of barely contained amusement, "that by taking my hand during the ceremony of eternal binding, you have just invoked the right of prior claim?" Jake blinked. "The right of what now?" "Ancient law," she explained, still holding his hand. "Predates the marriage contract by about 3,000 years, supersedes all previous arrangements." She paused, and this time there was definitely a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Congratulations, Jake Morrison of Earth. You have just accidentally conquered the Helix Empire." Jake had always prided himself on being reasonably intelligent. He'd graduated from the diplomatic academy with decent grades, successfully navigated 47 years of first contact protocols, and once managed to explain the concept of weekend to a species that experienced time as a series of overlapping spirals. But standing in the middle of a royal wedding ceremony, holding hands with a princess he'd just accidentally married while a 9-foot warlord looked ready to turn him into a decorative wall hanging, Jake's intelligence seemed to have taken an extended vacation. "Right," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "Ancient law. Prior claim. Conquered an empire. Sure. That's exactly what I was going for when I got up this morning." Warlord Krex's face had progressed from red to purple to a shade that didn't exist in any human color spectrum. "Release her hand, insignificant mammal, or I will tear your limbs from your body and use them as toothpicks." "Counterproposal," Jake said, surprising himself with how steady his voice sounded. "How about we all take a deep breath and discuss this like civilized beings?" "I am not civilized," Krex snarled. "I am a warlord. I do not discuss. I conquer." "Well, that's your problem right there," Princess Zara said, finally letting go of Jake's hand but staying close enough that he could smell her perfume. which was apparently made from something that smelled like starlight and danger. You think everything can be solved with brute force. It has worked admirably for the past 20 years, Krex shot back. Has it, though? She asked, and Jake noticed that her voice had changed. Gone was the demure princess tone, replaced by something sharp and calculating. Because from where I'm standing, your conquering has left you with 17 rebellious star systems, an economy based entirely on tribute payments, and a reputation that makes diplomatic solutions impossible. Jake stared at her. You're not actually a helpless princess, are you? Oh, I'm many things, she said, and the smile she gave him was definitely dangerous. Helpless isn't one of them. That's when the shooting started. Krex's honor guard, apparently deciding that diplomacy was overrated, began firing plasma bolts in their general direction. Jake, operating on pure instinct and 47 years of survival training, grabbed Princess Zara's hand again and ran for the nearest exit, which happened to be the landing platform where his diplomatic shuttle was parked. "This is your brilliant plan?" Zara shouted over the sound of energy weapons, turning the ceremonial grounds into a war zone. Run away? Well, it's worked for humanity so far, Jake shouted back, yanking open the shuttle's hatch. We've been running away from our problems for thousands of years. That's actually not a terrible philosophy, she admitted, diving into the shuttle just as a plasma bolt melted the spot where she'd been standing. Jake threw himself into the pilot's seat and began the startup sequence, which his shuttle performed with all the enthusiasm of a dying refrigerator. Come on, he muttered, watching Krex's honor guard spreading out across the landing platform. Just once could you start without requiring 3 cups of coffee and a personal sacrifice to the gods of mechanical engineering. Is this ship held together with prayer and spare parts? Zara asked, strapping herself into the co-pilot's seat. Prayer, spare parts, and bureaucratic stubbornness, Jake confirmed. The holy trinity of human engineering. The shuttle's engines finally caught, and they lifted off just as Krex himself burst onto the landing platform, roaring something that was probably anatomically impossible but sounded very unpleasant. Within minutes they were in space with Krex's entire war fleet in pursuit. So Jake said, trying to sound casual while dodging plasma cannon fire, on a scale of 1 to completely catastrophic, how bad is this situation? Well, Zara said, checking the tactical display, you've just invalidated the most important political marriage in the sector. Made an enemy of the most powerful warlord in 3 systems, and accidentally claimed sovereignty over an empire you know nothing about. She paused. On the other hand, you've also just given me the opportunity I've been waiting for my entire life. Which is? To burn the whole corrupt system to the ground, she said, and her smile was absolutely terrifying. Starting with Krex. Jake stared at her as another plasma bolt barely missed their starboard engine. Princess Zara? Yes. I think I'm beginning to like you. The Galactic Council headquarters looked exactly like what you'd expect from an organization that had been arguing about the same trade disputes for the past 300 years, posing, bureaucratic, and desperately in need of a good interior decorator. Jake's shuttle limped into the docking bay trailing smoke, sparks, and what remained of his dignity. Remind me again why we came here instead of, say, fleeing to the outer rim and living quiet lives as coffee farmers? Jake asked as they walked through corridors lined with the flags of 1,000 different species. Because, Zara said, straightening her ceremonial robes and somehow managing to look regal despite having spent the last 6 hours being shot at, the Galactic Council is the only authority that can legally recognize your claim to the Helix Empire. My claim to the what now? Jake stopped walking. I thought we were here to sort out the misunderstanding. Oh, Jake, she said, and the way she said his name made something flutter in his chest. There's no misunderstanding. You invoked the right of prior claim in front of 10,000 witnesses. By ancient law, you are now the rightful ruler of the Helix Empire. I don't want to rule an empire, Jake protested. I just wanted to finish my coffee and file my reports. Well, you should have thought of that before you grabbed my hand and triggered a 3,000-year-old law, she said, but her tone was gentle. Besides, you won't be ruling alone. The council chamber was a massive amphitheater filled with representatives from every major species in the galaxy. Jake had seen pictures, but nothing had prepared him for the sheer overwhelming presence of beings who had been making important decisions since before humanity had figured out agriculture. Chancellor Vex, a tall, gray-skinned individual with more tentacles than seemed strictly necessary, looked up from his datapad as they entered. Ah, Diplomat Morrison. Princess Zara, we have been expecting you. Great, Jake muttered. Nothing good ever starts with "we've been expecting you." The situation is quite complex, Chancellor Vex continued. We have received formal complaints from Warlord Krex, claiming that his betrothal contract was violated by illegal interference from a primitive species. There's that word again, Jake said. Primitive. You know, for a supposedly advanced galactic civilization, you sure do use a lot of speciesist language. We have also, the Chancellor continued, ignoring Jake's comment, received formal documentation of the invocation of the right of prior claim, which is a legally binding ancient law that supersedes all modern contracts. So which is it? Jake asked. Are we primitive and therefore incapable of invoking ancient laws, or are we subject to those same laws? You cannot have it both ways, Zara added, and Jake noticed that every word she spoke carried the weight of someone who had spent years studying galactic law. Either humanity is part of the galactic community, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails, or they are not. Chancellor Vex's tentacles writhed in what Jake had learned was the alien equivalent of nervous fidgeting. The situation is unprecedented. Unprecedented how? Jake asked. No one has ever invoked the right of prior claim accidentally, the Chancellor admitted. It requires a complex understanding of ancient ceremonial law, precise timing, and the willingness to accept full responsibility for the consequences. I see, Jake said. So either I'm too primitive to understand what I was doing, which means the law doesn't apply, or I understood exactly what I was doing, which means I'm not as primitive as you thought. This is giving me a headache, Chancellor Vex muttered. Join the club, Jake said. I've had one for 6 hours. That's when the alarm started. Warlord Krex has arrived, announced a voice over the intercom. He is demanding immediate audience with the council. He has also demanded single combat with the human. Single combat? Jake squeaked. It's his right, Zara said. Ancient law again. If you're going to claim rulership of the Helix Empire, you have to be able to defend that claim. I can't fight Krex, Jake protested. He's 9 feet tall and made of muscle and rage. I'm 5'10" and made of coffee and poor life choices. Then you'll have to find another way, she said, and stepped closer to him. Close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her silver eyes. Because I didn't wait 26 years for someone to rescue me from that marriage just to watch him get killed in single combat 5 minutes later. You waited for someone to rescue you? I waited for someone brave enough to take my hand when it mattered, she said softly. Someone who would risk everything for a stranger. Someone who wouldn't let fear stop them from doing what was right. I wasn't being brave, Jake said. I was being stupid. Sometimes, she said, and her hand found his, they're the same thing. The council's combat arena was apparently designed by someone who had never met a dramatic lighting effect they didn't like. Jake stood in the center of the ring, wearing borrowed ceremonial armor that fit him about as well as a tuxedo fits a penguin, while Warlord Krex paced on the opposite side like a caged predator with anger management issues. You know, Jake said, his voice echoing in the arena, when I woke up this morning, single combat with a 9-foot warlord wasn't on my to-do list. Silence, mammal, Krex roared, brandishing a weapon that looked like someone had crossed a sword with a small starship. Your defeat will be swift and brutal." "Well, that's considerate of you," Jake replied. "I appreciate efficiency in my inevitable dismemberment." Princess Zara sat in the royal observation box, her face carefully neutral, but Jake could see the tension in her shoulders. Next to her, Chancellor Vex looked like he was already composing the incident report that would explain how they'd accidentally caused the first galactic war in 3 centuries. "The rules are simple," announced the combat moderator, a insectoid creature with far too many eyes. "Single combat until one party yields or is incapacitated. No weapons other than those provided. No outside interference." "What about psychological warfare?" Jake called out. "Psychological warfare is permitted," the moderator replied, sounding slightly confused. "Excellent," Jake said, and turned to face Krex. "So, tell me, how's the wife?" Krex's eyes narrowed. "I do not have a wife." "Right, because you're marrying Princess Zara. Except you're not, because she's legally bound to me now, which must be embarrassing for you." "I will tear you apart with my bare hands," Krex snarled. "Sure, but think about what that looks like," Jake said, circling slowly around the ring. "The mighty warlord Krex, conqueror of 17 star systems, reduced to beating up a mid-level diplomat because he couldn't handle a little competition." "You are not competition," Krex spat. "You are an insect." "And yet," Jake said, "this insect is the one who's legally married to your intended bride. This insect is the one who now holds claim to the Helix Empire. This insect is the one who has made you look like a fool in front of the entire Galactic Council." Krex's roar of rage was probably audible from orbit. He charged across the arena, his massive sword raised above his head, and Jake did the most human thing possible in that situation. He dove sideways, rolled behind the nearest piece of cover, and kept talking. "You know what your problem is, Krex?" Jake shouted from behind a decorative pillar. "You think strength is about how hard you can hit something. But real strength is about knowing when not to hit something at all." "Stand and fight like a warrior," Krex bellowed, his sword carving chunks out of Jake's hiding spot. "I'm not a warrior," Jake said, rolling to a new position. "I'm a diplomat. And diplomacy is about finding solutions that everyone can live with." "There is no solution here except your death," Krex snarled. "Really?" Jake asked. "Because I can think of several. For instance, you could accept that Princess Zara was never yours to begin with. You could recognize that forcing someone into marriage is not actually conquest, it's just elaborate kidnapping. You could admit that maybe, just maybe, your entire approach to relationships needs some serious work." Krex's next swing missed Jake by inches. "I am a warlord. I take what I want." "And how's that working out for you?" Jake asked, staying just out of reach. "Those 17 star systems you conquered? How many of them actually like you? How many of them wouldn't rebel the moment they thought they could get away with it?" For just a moment, Krex hesitated. "You know I'm right," Jake pressed. "You can conquer territory, but you can't conquer people." "Not really. Not in any way that matters." "You know nothing about conquest," Krex said, but some of the rage had gone out of his voice. "I know that Princess Zara spent her entire life looking for a way out of marrying you," Jake said. "I know that she's brilliant and strong and capable of running an empire better than you ever could. And I know that deep down you know it too." Krex lowered his sword slightly. "She is formidable." "She is," Jake agreed. "And she deserves better than being treated like a prize to be won." "Then what do you propose?" Krex asked. Jake stepped out from behind his cover, hands raised. "I propose we stop fighting and start talking. I propose we find a way to end this that doesn't involve anyone getting killed. I propose we act like civilized beings instead of primitive barbarians." "And what of the Helix Empire?" "Princess Zara and I will rule it together," Jake said. "We'll reform the marriage laws, establish trade agreements instead of tribute systems, and generally try to drag your corner of the galaxy into the modern era. And what of me? Krex asked. Jake smiled. I hear the Outer Rim systems are looking for military advisors. Someone with your experience could write their own ticket. Assuming you're interested in being respected instead of just feared. Krex stared at him for a long moment. Then, to everyone's surprise, he began to laugh. You are either the bravest or the most foolish being I have ever encountered, he said. I'm voting for foolish, Jake admitted. But sometimes foolish works. 6 months later, Jake Morrison sat in his new office aboard the Helix Empire's flagship, staring at a cup of coffee that actually tasted like coffee instead of industrial lubricant. The view from his window showed the bustling trade hub that had once been Nexus 7, now transformed into the diplomatic heart of the reformed Helix Republic. You're brooding again, Princess Zara said, entering the office with the kind of graceful stride that suggested she'd spent the morning terrorizing bureaucrats and enjoying every minute of it. I'm not brooding, Jake protested. I'm contemplating the cosmic absurdity of my existence. That's brooding, she said, settling into the chair across from his desk. Though I suppose you have reason to contemplate. The latest reports show that trade agreements have increased by 300%, rebellion activity has dropped to practically zero, and the Galactic Council is considering adopting our marriage reform laws as a standard template. I still can't believe that worked, Jake said, shaking his head. 6 months ago, I was a mid-level diplomat whose biggest accomplishment was successfully filing noise complaints. Now I'm co-ruler of a galactic empire. Co-ruler, Zara repeated, and there was something in her voice that made Jake look up from his coffee. About that. What about it? What? Well, she said, leaning forward, we should probably discuss the terms of our arrangement. The marriage was legally binding, but it was also completely accidental. If you want to annul it, I'm sure the council would. Do you want to annul it? Jake interrupted. I asked you first, she said, but her cheeks had turned a very attractive shade of silver pink. I asked you second, he countered, and I'm pulling rank. You can't pull rank on me, she said. We're co-rulers. We have equal authority. Fine, Jake said, standing up and moving around the desk. Then I'm the one who accidentally conquered an empire by tripping over ceremonial crystals card. That's not a real card, she said, but she was smiling now. It is now, he said, stopping in front of her chair. I'm making it an official diplomatic protocol. The Morrison Doctrine. In cases of accidental empire conquest, the conqueror gets to ask the important questions first. And what important question did you want to ask? She said, looking up at him with those gold-flecked eyes. Princess Zara of the Helix Republic, Jake said, and his voice was suddenly serious. Would you like to stay married to a mid-level diplomat who has no idea what he's doing but is willing to learn? That depends, she said, standing up so they were face to face. Is this mid-level diplomat planning to keep being the kind of person who risks everything to help strangers? I'm planning to keep being the kind of person who can't mind his own business and has terrible survival instincts, Jake said. If that's what you mean. Close enough, she said, and kissed him. It was the kind of kiss that should have been impossible between two people from different species, but somehow worked anyway. The kind of kiss that suggested that maybe, just maybe, the universe had a sense of humor after all. When they finally broke apart, Jake was grinning. So I guess we're really doing this. Co-ruling an empire, reforming galactic marriage laws, and probably getting into more trouble than any two people have a right to. Speaking of trouble, Zara said, Krex sent a message from the Outer Rim. Apparently, he's been hired as a military advisor by the Centauri Defense Force. He says to tell you that he's discovered something called conflict resolution, and it's surprisingly effective. Good for him, Jake said. I always thought he had potential once he got past the whole conquer everything that moves phase. He also said that if we ever need military assistance, we should call him. He owes you a debt of honor for showing him a better way. I'll try not to let it go to my head, Jake said, then paused. Actually, who am I kidding? I'm absolutely going to let it go to my head. I defeated a warlord using nothing but sarcasm and psychological warfare. That's going on my resume. Your resume already says accidentally conquered Galactic Empire, Zara pointed out. I think you're set. Jake was about to respond when his communicator chimed. He glanced at the display and groaned. The Andromedan Trade Consortium wants to discuss a new shipping agreement. They're sending a delegation next week. Sounds routine, Zara said. With my luck, I'll accidentally declare war on them by using the wrong fork at the state dinner, Jake said, reaching for his coffee cup. That's oddly specific, Zara said. I've learned to plan for the worst-case scenario, Jake said, taking a sip of his coffee. It's served me well so far. That's when he noticed the new diplomatic papers sitting on his desk, right next to where he'd set his coffee cup down. They were marked urgent and classified, and definitely don't spill coffee on these. Jake looked at his coffee cup. He looked at the papers. He looked at Zara, who was already starting to smile. You know what, he said, carefully moving his coffee cup to a safe distance. I think I'm getting the hang of this whole ruling an empire thing. Famous last words, Zara said. Probably, Jake agreed. But at least we'll face whatever comes next together. Together, she said, and kissed him again. And somewhere in the depths of space, the universe chuckled at the ongoing adventures of the diplomat who'd changed galactic history by tripping over a crystal and accidentally starting a revolution. Because sometimes the best stories begin with the smallest mistakes, and the most important victories are won not through strength or cunning, but through the simple act of caring enough to take someone's hand when they need it most. Even if you have no idea what you're doing. Especially then.